Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Councilor Paniagua. Joining me, it's Madam President, Councilor Hudson, Councilor Caldwell, and Councilor Schultz. We are here to talk about our health insurance program. I am going to hand this to President Hudson.
Thank you very much, Counselor. And thank everybody for being here because this has been a conversation I have been continuing to talk about. And before we get started, I'm just going to share a little story. I was diagnosed with thyroid disease, and I had my thyroid removed. And when they removed my thyroid, to get me stabilized, it took them 1.5 years. I weighed 90 pounds before they stabilized my medication. I did the Lavoxarine, whatever it is, did not work for me. I'm allergic to it. So I had to have the Synthroid. What bothers me is that we have doctors, and these are medical professionals that make a decision about the patient that they see on a regular basis. And for a prescription drug company, I know you have doctors, but your doctor does not know me. And to sit around a table for 20 minutes and make an arbitrary decision to say she should be taking this, I don't really think it should be the call of the prescription drug company. Because first off, the troubles that we have being regulated on these meds, and for you to save $1 and for you to go and talk, our prescription plan, and let's be perfectly frank, I'm gonna put everything on the table. And then I have some of my union brothers and sisters here that will speak to their cases. And I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus, but this is my issue. You can make an exception for me, but you can't make an exception for the other 100 people that are missing their prescriptions. So PROACT called me and told me that my prescription was ready. So I went to get my prescription, and I hold a card that says $25 copay, which is what we negotiated in the city. Well, when I got to the pharmacist, my copay went from $25 now to $74 for a 30-day supply of meds. How do you arbitrarily do that? How do you make a choice about somebody's life as a prescription drug company? I have a real problem with that, and that's why we're here today. And we're gonna have a conversation about it. And with that, I'm going to ask Mr. Barnum to come to the mic.
Hello, everyone. I'm Steve Barnum. I'm local 400 president. Yes. I'm really going off what she said. We're having a lot of members also coming to me stating that they're not allowing them to get the premium drugs, that they cannot get it for $25, and if the doctor checks it on the box, it's got to be in the appeal system. And right now, I haven't had any member that has appealed it that has got the drug that they want. They're saying that they have to get a generic drug, which a few members said they tried the generic drug and it does not work. And again, in our contract, it states that generic or a $25 premium drug. Mainly, it seems like we're being pushed towards the retirees. The retirees have where they don't have the premium and all that, but if my doctor prescribes me something that isn't generic, I should only have to pay $25. That is in our contract. It has to be the same, equal, or better. And right now, lately, it has not been that. I'm getting numerous calls from employees that are on blood, like a couple thyroids, people taking high blood pressure medicine and all that. They're not allowing them to get the premium drug that some of them have been on for over 10 years. So where did the Where did it come where you no longer can get the premium drug? You have to go to generic. I mean, I'm being honest with you, like the 90-day thing, a lot of members now, they're not even taking that. They're going to Walgreens and getting a $30 because they don't want to go through PROACT with the 90-day prescription. This is just calls that I'm getting as a local 400 president. But my biggest question is, where did it take effect that we cannot get that premium drug? Or where is it where if the drug isn't generic, why are we paying $50, $70? It should only be 25 bucks. That's in our contract. That's the question I have for you guys.
Good afternoon. I'm Tom Ely, president of 3952 Middle Managers Union. So I got a, like Helen, I got a little story. So been involved, she knows I sat on the RFP committee. I've been involved in the healthcare coalitions and healthcare for 15 years now as a union member. We have never, ever, box was checked, you went and got the prescription, you paid the copay, $25. Generic, you paid $0. Back in the day, it was $5. Then we went to $0. I was taking a metformin ECR, an extended release TAC. I get a letter that says you can't take that, you got to take regular metformin. Called, kind of argued with them, went, got the regular metformin. Next thing you know, my insulin went up 30 units. I've taken this medication for years and was fine. Now all of a sudden, I'm doing more injectable. Like Helen said, our doctors know us. They're doctors. If the doctors that sit on your committee were that good of doctors, they'd be in practice and making money. That's my opinion. I think that it is, we have always, like Steve said, our contract says health insurance equal to or better than. I'm hearing now industry standards. We have always been above the industry standard. That's why we have taken lower wages, and if you raise our pay to the industry standard, right? I mean, if that's the way it's going to be. We sign a contract, we negotiate it, and that's the way it should be. We shouldn't have people telling us what we can take and what we can't take. If our doctor checks that box and says you get Lantus, you should be able to go get Lantus. If you get metformin ECR, you should be able to go get it. You get that thyroid medicine, you should be able to go get it. It's not costing the city that much more money. That's just my opinion. And I had a guy, and I'll tell you another thing. 3 days ago, I had a guy call me and say, what's going on with our health insurance? I'm out of my Lantus. I went to get it, and they told me I couldn't get it. And I have none. I got to take, he takes 30 units 3 times a day. I said, I got a pen. Come see me. I'll let you borrow one of mine. Right? So I got to give him my drugs so he can live. That's just unacceptable.
Thank you. And then to go back and to talk about, they asked for pre-authorization. My doctor sent 4 pre-authorizations in. Then after pre-authorization, oh, then you need to send an appeal. Why are we begging you to give us our prescriptions? Because that's what it feels like I'm doing. I'm begging you to fill my prescription. Not doing that. Is there anyone else before I open it to the company?
I'll do it. I'm Darcy Bergen. I was previously the president of 7801 for the city of Syracuse, CSEA. I am now executive vice president of our local, which is the county of 834. Last year, I had issues going in and out of the hospital, last year and the year before. The third time I came out of the hospital, I was given an antibiotic when I was in there because I contracted a disease. When I got home and I called the pharmacy at 4:30 to see if my prescriptions were ready, they were not. I was told the antibiotic that I had to have at a certain time every day was not approved. Here it is 4:30, my doctor's gonna close. What do I gotta go back to the emergency room again to get seen, to get that medication? It was ridiculous. So for 2 hours I had to stress while my doctor that I finally got a hold of called PROACT to find out why they needed an extra approval when it was, I just got discharged from the hospital and the hospital approved it. So who's actually in charge of me? Your doctors or my doctors? That's what I would like to know.
Their doctors.
Because if I'm going to your doctors, and I'm gonna go to them every time I'm ill, so they know me. Not that I'm just a name on a piece of paper. We have members that have diabetes, that have been on, just like Tom, the same medicine. And all of a sudden, one day they decide they're not going to give it to them? Are we not paying you guys for a service? That's what I think. And if, right now, by your service, I think we should get rid of Proact if they're not going to work with us and always against us. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Oh, Rocco's not here. Okay. And now I'll give PROACT an opportunity to respond, or HR or whoever.
I'd like to introduce Monica. Monica is the vice president of BPAS. They help us as a third-party administrator. So Monica and her team always have the best interest of the city of Syracuse at heart. They are third party, so they're not working with PROACT or against PROACT. They work with every provider we could ever imagine. So I'd like to give Monica the opportunity to discuss the industry as a whole and kind of where everything stands. Excuse me. And give her a chance to just speak to a non-specific idea, but just how it all works.
And I will. And before you get started, Monica, I don't know if you guys have this piece, but Representative Katie Porter in California, I don't know if you guys have this piece of paperwork, and she talks about Big Pharma, and she talks about the $34 million that went into executive compensation, and the $245 billion that was spent on R&D, which we get that, but they spent $471 on marketing, and then you had $50 billion on stock buybacks. So I think some of that is where we're having a problem.
So as Rick said, I'm Monica Cecilia. I do not work for the city. I do not work for PROACT. I am a hired consultant in the healthcare industry. I recognize some faces from some meetings we've had, some of the RFP committee meetings. We have been working with the city as your actuary and consultant since, I probably should have looked that up, I'm going to say 08, so quite some time. So we have a bit of history here and the duration of your benefits. We did do the RFP that was 2018? Okay, in 2018, and it was a joint RFP with the city, the county, and the city, strike that, the city, the county, and Oswego County went together to try to negotiate a better deal on behalf of all three entities. We went out to the prescription drug market and we did say, who can provide these services? What would the disruption be if we changed? What prices, like what would you charge us if we filled drug XYZ, you know, if we filled drug ABC? So we had a very robust process where we actually took the city's claims, we gave it to all the people who wanted to respond, blind, like no names, and said, what would you price this basket of goods at? Where would you deny claims? Where would there be a appeals process? What would it cost? And so taking one giant step back, every pharmacy benefit manager, which PROACT is on behalf of the city, has what they call a formulary. A formulary is the list of approved drugs, right? Or that's probably not a fair word. Yes.
Can they change that list while they're under contract at any time? Or do they need to wait until the contract expires to then make those changes?
They can change it. Nearly,
Want.
yes. Nearly every pharmacy benefit manager, and we work with plenty of we work with PROACT, but we work with plenty of pharmacy benefit managers on behalf of all of the clients that we serve. Nearly all of them change it every 2 years, right? Or twice every year, every January and every July. And the theory behind that, I am not a pharmacist, I am not a doctor, I did not go to pharmacy school, I'm an actuary by trade, so But the theory behind that is, you know what? Several years ago, Lipitor was the Cadillac for cholesterol, right? Lipitor went generic. So that rocked the entire world because there's millions and millions and millions of Americans taking Lipitor. So now all of the pharmacy benefit managers of the world say, okay, well now we have a generic, so why would people take Lipitor unless they need it, right? And so that process happens, and there's pricing differential, there's clinical efficacy rules behind all of that. I don't know how the process works. Again, I'm not a pharmacist, I'm not a doctor, but that's the theory behind it. There's new drugs that launch, right? 10 years ago, there were no oral chemotherapy drugs, and now there are. So
can I ask you a question
Yes.
real quick? You said there's new drugs that launch. Okay, I get that because that's what they keep telling me. But to me, it's like, okay, we have this new drug on the FDA and we're going to use you for our guinea pigs. No, because that's what it seems like to me. We're being used for the guinea pigs to see the efficacy of it.
I mean, I can't speak to that, but
No, you don't have to.
the FDA approval process is not being done, not being vetted through the city of Syracuse,
I
right?
understand that, but everybody's body is different. Just because 1 million people take that drug doesn't mean my body is going to handle that drug.
Right, and I do think, and again, this is where I will let the pharmacist speak, yes?
Go over there so they can hear you.
We just have to have everybody on the mic.
So we can hear they can hear you.
Sorry, it's recorded for posterity and other people are watching, unfortunately.
Again, been here 27, we've never had issues, okay? We have never had an issue down at any time other than probably the last 1 or 2 years. And again, my main question is, if you're not getting a generic drug, it's in our contract. We shouldn't have to pay no more than $25. If you took Lipitor off and made it a generic and you got a new drug, it should only be $25. And we got members that are paying 50, 70, 100. It should be 0 or $25. That's in our contract. That's the main argument that I have. We're being charged all different amount of money.
I just like to say this, and I want to put this on the record. There's no justification in my heart or anything that I can understand why anybody would make that choice of changing someone's medicine. I take medicine and being sick before, and I know that your body, everybody's body's different. So no pharmaceutical reps, no pharmacy, nobody, unless it was through a doctor's. Like I can't even imagine someone just changing the medicine and then needing the medicine and can't have it because it's a life and death. We cannot have that, by no means.
Yeah, so I guess to close the loop on what I was going to say is, in the process we vetted to look at all the various PBMs responding to this RFP, we did look at disruption, right? So part of that is, okay, we're super unhappy, we're going to terminate our contract with ProAct. We need a new contract with who? CVS, Express Scripts, like pick one, right? Whoever. Their formulary is also going to be significantly different than the one we've been living with for however long, the one's been in place. So now all of a sudden, we're going to go to CVS's formulary and we're going to have 1,000 more members disrupted, right? Because we did look at the disruption. What would be on-off formulary? What would be classified as brand generic? What would be tier 1, tier 2? Across all of them with this big grid of everything you're taking now, here's what would flip and here's what wouldn't. And that was part of the criteria the RFP committee considered in the selection of staying with the incumbent, right? There was more than one selection, but that was definitely vetted out. So, okay, so we pick up and we move to, I keep picking on CVS Caremark because they're front of mind for some reason. In that process, we're going to have this exact same conversation, but with a different set of people. So now maybe yours is on without an prior authorization, but yours isn't. And now you switched and you didn't, and then you have 1,000 more people disrupted because this process of formulary and what drugs are I mean, there are billions, I don't know the number, of drugs in the market. So we might be in a bumpy road for certain drug classes right now. And again, I'll let the pharmacist speak to that. But this concept exists in the whole world, right? You guys, Onondaga County, the city, school district, the town of Manly, whomever, everybody has a PBM, a formulary, and it changes at various times based on market developments.
Excuse me, just a quick question, right? Just, so if a doctor was to write a prescription, and in the prescription it said, I don't know, Synthroid, right? And they said no generic Synthroid. The PROAC has that right to say, no, you have to take the generic? Is that what you're telling me?
I don't know
I just wanna-
that specific.
They say they're not going to pay for it.
And
You
then
can take it, but
with a clinical evidence that I have, I, Monica, have tried 7 other drugs, I lost 90 pounds, this is the one that works for me. An approval process goes through and says, okay, you can now take this drug.
so again, you're a third-party
That
consultant.
doesn't happen?
It doesn't happen that quick, as quick as.
Oh, I don't mean like in 3
And how
seconds.
many times did Helen just say that she had to, her doctor had to resubmit 4 times?
Has it been approved, President, or no?
Yeah, for $74 copay.
So not at 25.
Everybody,
I just want to reiterate that Monica, these questions that we're asking now, I'm not trying to avoid the questions. PROAC's going to get their opportunity to discuss that. But what Monica's talking about now is the industry as a whole. So those questions are very specific to PROAC, and we will get those addressed. But what Monica's saying is regardless of which pharmacy company we go
at a
with,
federal level is what you're saying.
in an industry level, this is how pharmacies work, and this is how it's essentially going to be regardless if we use ProScripts, Express Scripts, CVS, you name it, they all have this same system. So with that being said, I don't know if we have more questions for Monica about the industry as a whole, but I don't want to burden her with the questions that we have for
When you say system, what do you mean? Like,
insurance.
okay, but you said regardless if they change to whatever CVS, PROAC, you're saying that there's nothing that can be in the contract that says if a doctor says X, Y, and Z, they can't get it. Is that what you're telling me? Nothing?
Well,
I'm just trying to.
You can say,
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, just so, because we know you're like the. Yeah, could you just tell us that one?
Or you can sit, actually, these seats are usually for presenters.
She like, no.
well, I actually have to drive to another meeting, so I am trying to go first on purpose, so I'm happy to help whoever I can. I am positive we could say to PROAC or whomever, anything anyone wants ever could be covered in full for 0 copay. Like, they can administer that, right? And then the city's budget is going to go up by
But
millions
that's
and
not what
millions
we're
of
asking them
dollars.
to do. And
I
let's be
understand that.
perfectly frank about this. You have a city full of employees, okay? All of these employees don't use drugs, but they're paying into the prescription drug program. So don't lose sight of that, okay? You got half of us paying into prescription drugs, and the other half are either too young or don't even take meds. So don't play that game. That's a game.
Sorry, guys, I'm trying to keep it on.
No,
mic.
wait. Let her finish, and then she can go on, and then we. Oh.
So my question is that we at one point, a few years ago, brought in like 6 or 7 different groups of consultants, and every one of them to a T said that we were above the industry standard. When did we become the industry standard? We were above, so our prescription drugs and our health plan was above the industry standard. So pretty much everything was, like you said, they covered everything. We've never heard nothing until the last few years about denying this. And why should we have to take a club or our doctor take a club out and beat people over the head 5, 6, get 8 different things that this doesn't work, that doesn't work before we got to get something covered? I took a metformin ECF for years, never no problem. Take me off it, now I'm taking 30 more units of insulin a day. What does that do to my liver, my kidneys, and everything else, right? I just don't think that that's right. You take a medication and your doctor regulates you and you're doing good, Tom, keep up what you're doing. Okay, no problem. Next thing you know, oh, we gotta add, your A1C's up, we gotta add 30 units. Why? We've never been there. I've worked for the city for 27 years. It's never been like that. And I've been a diabetic for a long time. So not since I got this, but I've been a diabetic a long time. I just don't think that all these consultants that come in and say, we're above the industry standard. That's why every year when we negotiated contracts, we took the 1% and 2% raises to keep our health care where it was at a minimum rate. I just don't know what to change, that's all.
Can I ask a quick question before you walk away? So you said you're a third-party consultant. When and how do you sit down at the table with ProAct, and what's your purpose? Sorry.
Well, so we do a lot of things for the city.
Okay.
One of the, all benefits related, okay? So we do some accounting stuff with your finance team related to benefits. We do contract negotiations with, you know, Excelis, ProAct, whoever. We administered the RFP that resulted in, you know, renewing with ProAct, because I don't think we did one prior to 2018, but you know, we do that.
Okay. Are you like an unbiased party then that comes
Yes,
in and
yes.
you're not really going to bat for the city employees and the county employees, or?
Well, I would like
You're
to
a
say
paper
I am.
pusher,
I am.
or-
I mean, I'm hired by the city and the county, for that matter, and the school district.
Right.
My firm is to work on their behalf, you know, as experts in the field. But I don't.
You don't look at the contract and say, hey, you know, you're going to lose, you're getting a bunch of stuff excluded. We might want to talk about these 4 diseases that are now going to be significantly affected as far as treatment.
I have no say in ProAct's formulary changes or anyone else's, just like I have no say in Excelis's negotiation with Krause Hospital and whether or not they're in or out of network, right? So I am aware of these things going on in the industry, but I have no say in if Dr. Smith is in or out of network with Excelis, and I have no say on if drug XYZ is on or off formulary with ProAct.
Just a neutral party there to help the process move. Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Is it part of your role to keep track, or do you keep track? Maybe no, you don't. Helen was saying that the people that use the prescription program versus the one that pay for it but don't. I'm one of those people. I take vitamin. You know, thank God. You know, I haven't had that.
Congratulations.
So I am the insurance dream probably. But then, so how does that weigh out? Are you the person to ask that question to?
I may have some knowledge of it, but each year we sit down with the city and ProAct, or the city and Excelis, and we get a full utilization report. So over the course of the year, 1,800 people were covered on the plan. You had 1,200 unique utilizers. You have, here's your most used pharmacy, here's your most used drugs, here's how many people are on specialty medications, here's how many people are using mail order. So they report on that to us. We sit in the meeting. They report on a lot of those statistics. Here's the average the city paid per generic. Here's the average the city paid per brand name drug. Here's the dispensing fees we charged, you know, all of that stuff. And, you know, a lot of the finance team, the HR team, we sit in on those meetings. And each year and then we strategize on, ooh, should we maybe do a campaign on whatever, like pick the topic or the strategy we might want to consider going forward.
So I have one more question. track the refusals of drugs and say 2018 to the refusal of drugs now, and the people that had to go through appeals back then versus the people that are having to appeal now? Is there any way to track that?
Well,
Is
I
there
think,
data on that?
the sheet that they gave us at the meeting, it talked about the denial. It was 76% denial.
But what was it back then, before we signed this?
And again, that's a PRO Act question, so we'll let them, if everybody's all set with Monica, I know she's on a time crunch as well.
Thank you, Monica.
Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Monica, I appreciate it. And now we can ask those questions. We'll turn it over to Dave, who is the president of PRO Act, so Dave can take the stage on all those questions.
Thank you. Do you mind if I sit here as well?
Oh, no, go right ahead.
I don't bite.
Well, I wasn't sure after that last question. So if I was going to ask my team to come in, guys, I want to make sure I sat here with you as well. So Thomas, good to see you again. Rita, we've met before, and Helen, I don't think have met before. So I want to say first and foremost, Dave Schreiber, president of PRO Act. I am a pharmacist by training. That comes before my job as the executive of the company, and I want to be very, very clear on that. I'm here today really to make sure that we talk through the issues and challenges you guys have had. We want to deliver on the promise we gave to the city, that we gave to the union members. Tom, you were there in the room with me. We've talked through some of these challenges, some of these concerns before. Our job is not to block anybody getting medication. My job as a pharmacist, our job as your PBM is not to stop people from getting medications. It may feel that way. And I see the head nods, and I certainly can understand the frustration that you went through with your antibiotic. Helen, as we talked through your medication, you say a $74 copay. There should be no $74 copay on your plan.
They told me last Friday.
I 100% agree with you. If you're getting charged $74, there's a problem, okay? And if that's an issue with the system, if that's an issue with the pharmacy and the way the claim is processing, I want to make sure that we look at that, and our team may have some answers for you as far as how that works. But there is no $74 copay that you should be paying. We're not trying to stop people from having, somebody used the word premium drugs, I think this gentleman did. We're certainly not trying to stop anybody from using these higher priced drugs. Rick or maybe Monica had mentioned how the P&T committee works and how we develop a formulary. There are two parts of that, and I'd like to start. And Deb Dempsey's our director of clinical services, so she's far more in tune with this day to day than I am. But the Pharmacy and Therapeutics Committee actually develops the formulary two parts. The first part is actually clinical rationale. So we look at drugs like, we'll say, Synthroid and levothyroxine, and I agree. I don't know you or how your body works or how you metabolize that drug, but we look at medical data out there and say for the majority of patients, this does work the same. It's shown the same bioavailability, same efficacy, same safety profile. And then we look at the financial profile of those medications. And we make determinations, we do, and say this drug will be covered on the formulary, this is not covered on the formulary. Some plans, the city of Syracuse does not. Some plans will have 3 different tiers. Maybe drugs are covered at a higher copay because we find them to be less efficacious, maybe at a higher cost. And we make determinations as a PBM as to where those drugs fall within the formulary. As Monica had said, that typically happens twice a year. Those things used to happen 4 times a year. So I've been with the company now for 21 years, and the changes are getting smaller because the reality is there are far more generic drugs available today than what we had 10 years ago, what we had 15 years ago. So as there are more alternatives available, there are more opportunities for patients to use different generic products on the market. And we are also working for the city of Syracuse. Now, at the same time, we're also trying to balance the needs of our network pharmacies and the members, which are each of you, and the members that you represent here today. So I just want to step back again and say that our goal, our job is not to try to block anybody in this room or your members from getting a medication. If and where we have a medication that requires a prior authorization or is excluded, it's due to clinical efficacy or the financial profile of the drug or a combination of both.
So before you move any further, because I did my research on can't even say the word, levothyroxine, whatever it is. That is used for moderate thyroid problems. Synthroid is used for severe thyroid problems. I think I qualify as severe because they took my whole thyroid out.
And respectfully, I disagree. I would say that the medications themselves, there are different strengths. There are probably, Deb, help me, 15 different strengths of both Synthroid and levothyroxine. I would say at the proper dose, I do agree that those 2 medications are what we call a narrow therapeutic index drug, meaning that the way that your body metabolizes it versus mine or somebody else can be very different. And I absolutely agree that if you go from a 125 microgram of Synthroid, you might need 137.5 or 150 micrograms of levothyroxine, just because of the way that your body is handling the actual drug itself. I would disagree, however, that the one is used for more severe or less severe. different conditions from a thyroid side.
That, you know, opinions, and that's fine.
Well, and respectfully, I would say it's not an opinion. I'd say it's actually scientific in the way that those drugs are actually used. Tom, I would like to come back to the metformin, though, from your seat, because I think as we look at that, there are been more and more formulations of different metformin products. If you go back 15 years ago, there was one. You took it twice a day, right? It's how it was done. They were poorly absorbed. They had a terrible side effect profile. They were hard on patients' bodies. So we came out, I say we, the industry came out with extended release formulations of these products. Some are still taken twice a day, some are taken once a day. Some of those drugs are in thousands of dollars a month. Some of those drugs are $25 for the extended release. I don't know, without looking at your exact profile, if you were on an extended release $50 drug or an extended release $2,500. At the end of the day, if the reality is the only one that works for you is this, we're not trying to stop you from having that. Our job is to make sure that we help control costs for the city of Syracuse. And guys, I work here in town. I work in East Syracuse. I want to be very clear. I didn't fly into this meeting. I fly all around the country for different meetings. This is the first week in the last 2 months. I've been here in town only. We're here as a local company, and we want to make sure that you are getting your medications.
You did take me off the ECR and put me on a straight metformin. You wouldn't know, you did not approve an extended release. You put me on a straight metformin.
So, and I'd have to,
And I would say, my thing is, so kind of listening to your statement, I guess you're summarizing is it boils down to dollars and cents, right? If I get what you're saying, it all boils down to money. And it's never been in the past, to my knowledge, been a money issue. If you needed the medication, like I said, why should our doctors, who now are treating thousands of patients and hundreds of patients, and their time and their job is more cumbersome and more tough, right? Why should they have to keep submitting more evidence and more evidence and more evidence? If the doctor says it's medically necessary, why should he have to submit anything? He is my doctor. He's the one that says it is medically necessary that I take that. Why should he have to say, okay, and then denied? Well, we got to get eight more case things that you tried denied, and all the time it's wearing on my body.
sure. So Tom, I'd like to ask Helen, could you read those stats you had from that review in California? You mentioned, shoot, I apologize. The lady's name you had said.
It's Representative Katie
Katie Porter.
Porter.
Yeah, if you could just.
Yeah, the stats she had. She noted that just $2.45 billion was spent on resource and development, while $4.71 billion was spent on marketing and $334 million on executive compensation. Additionally, the company spent $50 billion on stock buybacks.
And who was that? Thank you. This is Big Pharma, right? So I want to be very clear, guys. I'm not Big Pharma. I did not get a $3.7 billion bonus last year. We are not Big Pharma. Our job, truthfully, is to find that balance between what's out there in the market, what Big Pharma has had approved through the FDA, and what is getting paid for. So Tom, when you ask that question, if my doctor prescribes it, shouldn't I be able to get it? We're not trying to stop you from being treated for the condition that you have. But I would argue that Big Pharma has been historically the problem. When they walk into a doctor's office and says, hey, here are samples that we'd like your patients to have, get your patients to use this new formulation of metformin. I'm not saying that it doesn't work for patients. I'm just asking the question of, does every single patient that needs a metformin have to have that newest form? I don't know.
So why, if Helen's on a medication, a thyroid medication, or I'm on a metformin diabetes medication and been taking it for years and it's working, we have no issues with it.
Yep.
Why come in and say you can't take it anymore, you gotta go try this?
So that goes back to one of the comments that Monica made. As the industry evolves, as more products are coming to market, we evaluate multiple times a year and say, does it still make sense? And you're right, we don't know, Helen, does it work and make sense for you? Does it make sense for Tom? We don't know that, guys. We have to make these decisions at a macro level of what are the choices that we can make that are the best as a whole, clinically. You're not wrong that there are financial implications as well. But first and foremost, as a pharmacist, I will say our P&T's job is to make clinical determinations as to what we put on the formulary where. There is absolutely a financial component. Yes, ma'am.
So, Mr. Scriber, let me ask you this, right? Because you're saying that, you know, you work for us and we're all in this and whatever. But when it takes me 4 months to go back and forth with PROACT to try to get my meds, I just threw my hands up. I went straight to Synthroid, and I ended up paying $187 to get my prescription filled. I mean, I can just go to the drug companies.
And I can tell you, I felt like they were just trying to wear me down to where I threw my hands up.
They
and
wore
said,
me down.
"Hey," yeah, and then me too. So I quit fighting for what I had, and in the end result, I wind up taking 30 units more of
the Lantus, yeah.
So I just, we don't understand
Sure.
where it changed.
Sure.
We back in 2018, we weren't even realizing the discounts and the paybacks off of half of our drugs when we were getting them, until the city said, whoa, wait a minute, how come we aren't getting this? So if it was all about money, where were them things going in PROAC's pocket? It wasn't coming back to the city.
So we've administered the benefit for the city of Syracuse since, I believe, 2013 or 2014. I was part of that negotiation, sat at the table as we renegotiated this with BPAS in 2018 for 2019. The contract with the city of Syracuse has always been 100% pass-through. So if you're talking about kickbacks and maybe like rebates, okay, so all of that comes back to the city. We don't withhold any of that. We do have contracts. We've got 750 clients across the country. We do have some contracts where we do retain a portion of the rebates. You ask about what is Monica's job with BPAS. Their job is to hold us accountable as a PBM. Their job is to go out and to negotiate the best deal possible for you as the city, financially, and also looking at the disruption. So to her point, when we went down through, we compared the formula that we had, what we were looking at forward. They compared, I understand, through all the other, I'll say, competitors to myself that came forward and looked at the disruption as well. We've never retained the rebates. So I guess I want to be very, very clear on that. I'll let Deb and Jeannie speak to some of the other more specific in terms of what's happened where, but Tom, I want to be crystal clear. We don't retain any rebates from the city of Syracuse, from Onondaga County, either.
That's totally a different subject, and I probably...
Okay. I just want to make sure, we don't conflate the issues here. I want to make sure.
The bottom line is we shouldn't have to be beating people over the head to get medication.
You're absolutely right.
That we need and deserve.
And Tom, Helen, you're absolutely right. I don't want...
To be perfectly honest, if I could take the zero pay deduction drug, I would.
You'd rather do it.
I'd rather keep my $25 in my pocket.
Sure.
But I can't.
Sure.
So, as a guy...
All right, stop talking, Tom, damn it.
So as a guy, right, that says that, so there is formularies and you gotta take, what is the objective of every human being is to take less drugs, at least my objective. So if you gotta say, okay, well, you can take this, but if you take a little more of this drug, it's gonna help you out. Let's regulate it, and you might have to take, more of this to equal out what you were taking here.
Are we talking about the Synthro, the Voxlite, use the examples?
Talk
Okay.
about any drug in general.
Sure.
So if you say, okay, we refuse you this, like I took the metformin ECR. You get off of that, they say, next thing you know, I'm taking 30 more units of insulin, and I've been on this for 6 years, never had a problem, right? Why is it better for me as a patient or a human to have to take more medication of something to make up for taking a generic?
And Tom, I can answer that. Without looking at, I maintain a pharmacy license. I would be lying if I said I practice pharmacy day to day. Deb and her team are the ones that do that. If you'd like to sit, I'd love to have you come to our office. We could review the notes. We could look.
Right to my point. You guys don't look at my case every day.
No. That's Tom, that's not what I said. I said I don't personally look at these details, not for you. I don't look at them for anybody anymore. Guys, I'd be lying if I said day to day I practice as a pharmacist. Deb and her team do. This is what they do daily. Now, do they see you as a patient? No. Can she tell and learn everything about you from your chart? Absolutely not. Do we do the best that we can in the situation that we have to review, and then we ask for information from your physicians? Yes, that's what we do. Do we go to the offices and sit and have a personal connection with every patient? I wish we could do that. That's simply not reasonable.
So my-
Did you want to? I know you're up there. I'm afraid you're going to hit me if you don't let somebody speak here.
I'm trying to be official and shit. I'm Michaela Oni. I am the president of Unit 7801. I guess and I know you went over this a little bit in the last meeting, so I don't know if this is a you question or a you guys question. Do we have dedicated case managers at PROACT that are looking just at City of Syracuse cases as they come up? Is that
From a prior authorization side?
well?
Or are you looking globally at the plan?
Here's what I'm wondering.
Sure.
If we have somebody that's just sort of looking at this person's prescribed this isn't on the list, rubber stamp move kind of thing, as opposed to active case management where, okay, there are others. Has that been tried? Can I reach out to the doctor's office? Can I, work on this patient's behalf to see, before I deny their medication, what steps can I take to make sure that I should be denying it? Or is it just, here's the formulary and boom, that's not covered, so we're switching this without having that investigation happen?
Sure.
Do you know
Deb,
what
could
I
I
mean?
have you maybe come up and speak to the PA process as a whole? I think, Michaela was your name, I'm sorry?
Yes.
Okay, I know
Yeah,
we've
I'm
met
sorry
before through these
too.
different processes. I'll have Deb maybe come speak to the formulary, the appeals process, the prior authorization process, because she'll be better equipped to speak to that than I could. So I don't want to misspeak. So Deb, if you want to, this is Deb Dempsey, pharmacist, and she's our Director of Clinical Services.
So to answer your question first, before we go through some of the material, we have account coordinators and we have our account manager, Jeannie, who is dedicated to the account of City of Syracuse. As far as clinically related items, when they come in, our team will intake it either through our portal, which is the process is outlined in the paperwork. Sorry, I have my back to some of you. Our process is outlined in this, we'll go through it, or it's faxed in from the prescriber, and then we use clinical criteria guidelines, so we make sure that the process is fair and consistent across every member that we're reviewing, and we will identify based on either if the doctor answers specific questions in our portal or through the clinical notes that they've provided, if that criteria has been met, or as David mentioned, if we need more information, we will reach out to the doctor to obtain that information. If based on the information that was submitted, they don't meet the criteria, again, to make sure that we're consistent and fair, we don't want to treat one person differently than the other, we will not approve it, but then provide the prescriber and the member with information on why it's not approved and directions on how, if they need to submit additional information, if we got it wrong, how they can either contact us via phone to speak about it, or they can fax in or visit our portal again to reopen the case and have it reevaluated with the additional information.
Okay, so
Well, before you go, excuse me, Michaela.
Oh, she's not leaving.
You can actually sit with him
Okay.
if you like, because you seem to be going to
I'll
ask
sit
the
right next to you.
questions.
She's a really smart one, I'll be honest. That's why I bring her for this.
that was probably the best thing you'll say all day. My redirect, I guess, of that, and it's probably not financially sound, because, what do I know? But I would think, as I used to work in insurance and case management, isn't it better from a patient perspective if your doctor is prescribing this and I say, well, there are cheaper, so I'm going to fill this just for this amount of time and look into, contacting the doctor to say, are there other things that this person could take, but I don't want to take them off their medication for 3 and 4 months while we're waiting for that information, because, there are people, it's a life-saving thing, and I would think, to err on the side of caution, if the doctor's prescribing it, take that with the pound of salt, give them their medicine, and then see if that can be finessed on the back end rather than blocking things up front.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, I know it's a money thing,
No,
but
and
it's,
so we mentioned the formulary changes typically happen twice a year, January and July. We send out notifications 60 to 90 days ahead of time if there is going to be a formulary change associated with the medication that a member's on. So they will get a letter letting them know that the drug that they're on is going to be impacted, either potentially not covered or potentially changing tier levels. I know you guys only have generic or non-generic copays, but we will let them know, and then that gives them an opportunity to work with their doctor to either provide us with the additional information on why they can't switch to that alternative or switch to an alternative. The other option, which is outlined in one of the handouts that I gave you guys, which looks like this. If your prescription rejects at the pharmacy, what basically we want the members to know is that they can call ProAct. And if it's something that they've been on before, our ProAct Help Desk, which is 24/7, is authorized to allow a one-time override while the prescriber submits additional information or whatever is needed for us to be able to review the rejection. So that member does not have to go without the medication.
a lot of attention. So, sorry, Helen. I guess I would want, I mean, I know I've gotten one of those letters, in 90 days. Well, nobody thinks 90 days is coming up fast or anything. Is that letter also sent to physicians' offices saying, hey, there's a change for this medication for your patients? And when that's happening, again, the responsibility is coming to the patients to provide you with that information. And I'm wondering, on the case management end, is there a way for that to be, for PROACT to be more active than just sending a letter saying, here, get your doctor to send us something else, when you know what you need to make that more smooth?
So we don't send notification to the prescribers. As someone mentioned, I think there are probably already pretty overwhelmed with everything that's going on with the office. We do send the notifications to the member, and we can work with the city of Syracuse to provide that. Jeannie can provide you with a list of impacted members ahead of time, so that, whether it's, depending on whether it's HR or who wants to coordinate directly with their employees to say, hey, we noticed that your medication's going to be disrupted. We don't even have to share medication if we want to keep that information private. But we want to make sure that you got that letter and that you know that you need to take action, just so there's another extra touch point with the member.
I mean, I think that would be a thing, considering, we've all had the plague for the last couple of years, and getting a note that such and such medication, that may not be on the priority of the pile of papers.
And I just want to clarify one point too. I know it may sound like semantics, but we say often insurance, right? We use that word and we toss it around a lot. And I want to be very clear that we're not an insurance company. We do not provide insurance to the city of Syracuse. We administer a self-funded health plan. And what that means is we ultimately, we pay the pharmacies up front, and then we bill the city of Syracuse for those charges. We don't mark that up at all for us. We literally pay the pharmacy, then we send a bill through to the city of Syracuse. So when we talk about rejecting claims, that's not money back in my pocket. It isn't as if we get paid a premium that then by Deb and her team, I say to them, reject everything you can, because when you reject it and go to lower cost drugs, we make more money. That's not our business model. It's not how we work. We are not an insurance company. We administer a self-funded health plan. So I think that's a very, it may sound like a minor difference, but it's very important, I think, to the business model, how we work. Yes, ma'am.
So then how do you take somebody that gets discharged from the hospital and tell them they can't have that medicine after they just were on it for 5 days?
So I think this comes back to Deb's point. If and when those calls come in, if in that situation, we have protocols put in place at the call center to allow an override. Now, if you're discharged
But there wasn't an override until I had to step in.
So
Here I am, ill,
discharge
on bed, calling my doctor and calling PROACT and calling the pharmacy, trying to get the medication. Why are we leaving that to the members to fend for themselves, instead of PROACT saying, you know what, she just got out of the hospital, let's give her this medication, she might need it. When do you start taking over as playing God with people's medications?
So I can't necessarily speak to your specific case because I don't know exactly what drug you were on or what happened when you called the help desk. Typically, we don't put a prior authorization or a rejection on a medication that would be dispensed at the time of discharge for that specific purpose. We'll ensure that those types of medications that are needed when people want to go home from the hospital, so that they don't incur extra expenses by staying extra in the hospital because they can't get their drug, are allowed to process. The only thing that I could potentially think of is that there was a cost issue, that it was over the maximum claim threshold, which would then cause a flag. And in that case, typically what our help desk would do is have them process like a 1-day supply or a 2-day supply, so that you could still go home with the medication, and the rest would be filled after, once it was able to be evaluated, if it was, over a certain dollar amount, like, $1,500. But I can certainly take your name and get more details for you too. Mm-hmm.
Why is the process of denial? I heard him say that you got to, for 6 or 7 different processes you got to go through. You go and it's denied. So then the doctor says, okay, it's medically necessary to deny. Then it's got to get to, they tried this drug. Why does it have to be? Why can't it just be the doctor says, look, this is what works for the guy. He's the patient. Because everything I keep hearing basically rounds back around the cost, right? And that's not, that's not the city of Syracuse's health insurance plan.
So Tom,
that's not the contractual with the city of Syracuse and the union.
So if I could ask, so you said 6 or 7 steps in the process. Did we say that, or?
Yeah, the guy there said that you gotta try 6 or 7 different formularies and go through this and.
Nope. So I can let Deb kind of talk through what the different steps of that would look like. We would never ask somebody to try 6 or 7 different things. We never want to chase somebody around. I know you said beat somebody over the head with a club earlier. It's certainly not.
Can I ask you,
Yeah.
so Helen's got a thyroid.
Yep.
She goes and they say, take this, and the doctor says, she can't take this, we need her to take this.
Mm-hmm.
Deny. Why is it denied?
And what?
4 times. Why is it denied?
4
Why
times.
why is it the burden of the patient to keep going back? You know, I see my doctor as I think I see my doctor overabundance amount of times a year than I need to. I mean, that I really feel comfortable.
So I'm gonna.
Why do I have to keep going back and calling and saying all this?
So I'm going to try to avoid some very awkward moments in this meeting here as we keep going forward, because I think we're getting some very conflicting data and information back between what we're hearing in this room and what we're hearing from some of your physicians. Because we knew some of you would be here today, and some of this information, we went back and actually asked some of those questions. What did happen? What were the steps that we took? And we're hearing very different stories back from your physicians and the notes that we have documented in terms of the questions. So I hear it taking 3-4 months. I hear 3-4 times we're appealing. But we've also had documentation from physicians saying this is the direction we're headed. Now, without, in this large group, I would be happy to sit down one-on-one. We could go back, we could pull notes, and we could look at what's actually happened through that process. But I want to be very, very clear. The average turnaround time that we have for a PA is 2 to 3 days. The goal is not to be 3 to 4 months. It is unacceptable if it's taking 3 to 4 months. Something is broken if it's taking 3 to 4 months. This should take 2 to 3 days. If this takes a week, that's unacceptable. So
you're saying that if my doctor, when she said he needs the ECR, and that it was denied, so take this, so we take it, 3 months later, well, Tom, we gotta raise your insulin.
is this cool,
Right? I just don't see, I don't understand where
Yep.
PROACT
Where
has
it's
become
broken.
the overseer of my medication.
Sure. So Tom, and you're not wrong that it comes back to largely financial, but I think we're looking at it from a different angle, and I want to be clear the angle that we're looking at it from, because our job, you ask, why don't we just allow these medications to go through? Big Pharma historically has gone in and said for years, put your patients on this. We'll give free samples, and that's why there's all this money going toward marketing. Get your patient on this, and then we can charge $600 a month for this medication when there's a $20 generic. I'm not saying that 100% of patients can use that $20 generic, but if 95% of the patients can use that $20 generic, our job is to help control cost and to say Big Pharma's not always right. The patient should not automatically be put on that $600 drug. And we ask, has the patient tried this drug? Have they failed that drug? Yes. Have they used this drug? Yes. Then you can have that medication. But to just open the floodgates and say altogether that Big Pharma, I mean, you handed me this article, Big Pharma coming through and saying that we have these medications that are going up 12, 15, 20% annually, and that we're just going to allow patients, every single patient, to have it, doesn't make good financial sense for the city, and ultimately wouldn't make good sense for you as members either, or as taxpayers here in the city.
So, all of our members are taxpayers. So, I would say that, so when I just recently changed doctors, my doctor went into concierge medicine and all this, so I changed doctors. I feel I got a very good doctor. Walked in the very first meeting, going over my stuff, oh, this looks good. Lantus is a very good medication. We know what it does. We know how to regulate it. It's very good in the patients. Next thing you know, the letter says taking off. After I just see my doctor that said, hey, yeah, this works really good. I'm glad you're on it. We're doing good. Now I got to go back to him and say, hey, I got to appeal this. I got to do this. I don't want to change because what do you put me on? Whatever, some other generic thing, and now I'm taking 40 more units a day, right?
And I just want to say something real quick. And I think it speaks to the headline of that article. It's $2.1 or $2.8 million in research and development, right? And then what was the amount for advertising?
4.7 billion.
4.7 billion. So that line right there speaks to what they're trying to help us do. So Big Pharma is putting this much money into research, and they're putting this much money into trying to sell it to you. So all PROACT is doing is coming back and saying, is it just a sales pitch? Because you spent all this money, you're trying to recoup $2 million on advertising. So are they trying to recoup that cost and just sell you a drug because they can, or are they trying to, is it the right drug? So I think that's where they come in as a partner saying, Big Pharma's coming in, introducing all these very expensive drugs, and they're expensive because they've put this time and money and marketing into it. Is the other player a viable option that doesn't spend, generics don't spend the energy and the money on advertising, things like that. So I think that's kind of where the cost issue comes in, and they're just trying to protect us from Big Pharma is what they're essentially doing.
And Tom, I want to carry on to that as well. So when you go in and you see your doctor and they see that you're on Lantus and they say that's a good drug, I don't disagree. I think the difference in the language that we're speaking is the doctor doesn't look at that and say it has to be brand name Lantus, right? If I as a pharmacist talk about, Monica used the example high cholesterol Lipitor, I'm not probably going to call it a torvastatin because most people in the room are going to look at that and say, I don't know what that means. I'm not going to say levothyroxine, I'm going to say Synthroid, because those are the drug names that I was taught when I was in pharmacy school. I just had to lean in and ask Deb, what is the generic name of Lantus again? I don't even know. But if you were to tell me this is the brand formulation of Lantus and there's a generic available, I would argue that 95 to 98% of the patients can take that. When you ask physicians, they just care that you're on Lantus. They don't care if it's the brand or the generic. Now, there will be situations whereas individual patients can't take that generic formulation, and then we ask that they provide paperwork to say this is where Tom tried it, this is where this situation happened, his A1C was off, he had to take more insulin, we'd like him back on the brand name, and that's fine.
I've been taking this brand of medication for 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Why should I have to change? If I could see if I just went to the doctor and he says, okay, well, your A1C's up, you got diabetes, we want to put you on an injectable medication. So we're going to prescribe Lantus, right, whatever it be.
Yep.
And you go and say, tonight, we'd like you to try the generic first. Why you got to send people letters and say, you can't take that thyroid medicine that you've been on for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. You got to now go take this medication.
So those, I want to use very different examples, so very different explanations. In the example of Lantus, there wasn't previously generics. I mean, that generic came out more recently. There have been generics for Synthroid out for 30 years, right? So that's a very, very different situation, a very different argument. So if you're on the brand name, if and when, so New York State actually says that if and when a generic becomes available, they have to, the pharmacy has to dispense a generic, unless your provider writes dispense is written at the bottom, right? People said that it could check mark, and the state itself, I mean, this isn't a PBM rule, this is actually a requirement on the pharmacy side, and if you go down through and look at the data, it's 99% of, if there's a generic available, the generic is dispensed. But that still means there's one person. There are how many thousands of people on the City of Syracuse plan, and we're looking at the one-offs in situations whereas those patients cannot take the generic, and there should be an authorization and approval, an override process, whereas they can take the brand name formulation. But I would hope you can understand and respect that we also were trying to take care of that 99% that can. And if you use some of these examples where you've got a $600 brand for 30 days versus a $15 or $20 generic, Tom, it does come down to price. And I hate to be that way, but at the end of the day, why would we allow 100 people to take a $600 drug when 98, 99 of them could take the $20 drug? For the two that need that $600 drug, absolutely. I know it's pain. Guys, I've got 5 kids. I work 80 hours a week. I don't have any more time than any of the rest of you do. It's exhausting. I don't understand half the stuff that comes from my true insurance company when it comes to my medical plan. I know it's confusing. I know it takes time. We are just trying to do our job to make sure that ultimately we allow the City of Syracuse, we administer a benefit plan for the City of Syracuse that meets your contractual guarantees, that helps keep costs down ultimately for the city, and at the end of the day, gets you guys your medication. We are not here to make anybody beat you over the head or beat us over the head or whoever got hit with a club. That's not our goal. That's not what we're here trying to do.
Well, I'm going to step in here for a minute because we're going on like an hour and a half, and I think at 3:30 we'll wind it down. And I appreciate everybody being here, but I think you were going to say something,
Actually,
Jean?
he circled right around and said exactly what I was going to say.
All righty, and with that, I'm going to ask Auditor Maroon.
Good afternoon. Nader Maroon, Syracuse City Auditor. I used to sit in this Common Council, and we'd had meetings like this, and it's a deja vu all over again, as Yogi would say. I'm confused because you just said, I'm sorry, you don't remember your name, David.
David.
That you try to, I get it in terms of what you're trying to do and scale and financial. But what I don't understand, and what I heard at the last Labor Coalition meeting that the city had, when the members, the union members spoke up, and as Darcy and Michaela just spoke to, was, and Rocco, who's not here,
Right.
Also said, the city of Syracuse contracts with you to do a service. And the operative word for me is contract. And the operative word when Tom and Steve and Darcy and Michaela spoke was also contract. They have a contract with the city, a labor agreement. And part of that labor agreement addresses the issue that Helen raised, President Hudson, and the others, is that there is a certain agreed upon price that members will pay for medication, and that there's no equivocation about that. That's a contract.
100% agree.
Right. And obviously there's been testimony that there's been some violation to that. Why did that occur? I simply don't understand that, number one. And number two is that it would seem to me that if the contract that you negotiate with the city through Monica as a partner in that contract needs to identify and be clear to the memberships that are entering into a labor agreement with the city that these things can happen. And I haven't been a part of the city as long as Tom or Steve, but it just seems to me that if we're going to enter into an agreement, then it needs to be very clear about any changes or any exceptions. And about this appeal process, I may have gotten it wrong from the Labor Coalition meeting to today, and I haven't read your materials yet. But again, why does the person who enters into a labor agreement with the city and works for the city, and then there's a contract that you all have worked out with the city, why then does it occur that there's different pricing that's occurring, that the member's paying? And why is it that, I think it was Darcy or Michaela mentioned, why can't there be a suspension of the time to negotiate that 3 or 4 months of the medication that they need to be well? Because that 1% is a human being.
I 100% agree.
That's what's important. And there's a commitment that people make when they enter into a labor agreement, and there's a contract that we enter into in good faith with you all, that these things won't happen. So I'm trying to understand how they happen. Sure. You don't have to answer me now, but I think that it's something that when the city is up for renegotiating its contract with you, certainly our labor members need to feel that these, and know that these kinds of occurrences aren't going to have happened. And if it takes our office to get involved in terms of doing an audit of this, I'm happy to do that on behalf of the council.
So Helen, can I ask one question? Do you mind if I ask what pharmacy you use, retail?
Rite Aid.
Rite Aid, okay. So I think I can answer, and I apologize, sir, what was your name? Nader. I think I can answer your question in terms of how does that happen. There is no $74 copay on your plan, okay? There's a $25 copay. I actually have a 4:30 meeting with our leadership team from our mail facility, and why that's important is it's about Synthroid. And what's happening is so when, I want to get a little technical here, but when a claim comes out from a retail pharmacy, from any pharmacy, a retail, mail order, specialty pharmacy, it does not go right from the pharmacy to the PBM. It goes through an intermediary known as a switch. Okay, so what happens is essentially they take that data, they route it to the PBM. So if you look at your ID card, you have a BIN number, you have a PCN number, you have an ID number, that sends the claim to the switch, who then identifies that BIN as ProAct, who then routes it to us, okay? And I didn't know this until this morning, and that's why we're having a call at 4:30 with our leadership at the mail team. We've had a lot of complaints from the mail order members saying, I should have a $50 copay, I should have a $20 copay, not City of Syracuse, but globally. And why is my copay $112? I don't have a $112 copay. There's programs put in place at the switch level where manufacturers, big pharma, will fund to help offset copays, okay? So they will actually put in place and say, we're going to put e-vouchers in place, and this e-voucher will help reduce the cost by $30, by $50. That's manufacturer, pharma specific, okay? It's down to the drug that they have, and they put in the system. I can tell you in the Kinney Drugs platform, or the mail order platform that we utilize, those e-vouchers come across and only apply on paid claims, okay? So if the claim actually rejects, there's no e-voucher applied. If the claim pays, that e-voucher then reduces that patient's copay down to, I'll say, a more acceptable or more palatable level for that patient. What I just found out this morning that's happening is, and Jeannie's probably like, why didn't you tell me this before we came in here? There is, and the name of it is escaping me, but it's like a copay wrap program that's happening at the switch level, whereas the claim doesn't reject. So the claim comes out to the switch, sends to ProAct. We reject the claim because we say that's an excluded drug. Rather than come back to the pharmacy and say rejected, needs a prior authorization, when it hits the switch has a program in place with the manufacturer of Synthroid specifically. I can't speak to anything else. I only know Synthroid specific, that then says reduce the cost of the drug by X. Okay, so that's, I don't want to say I'm a gambling guy, but if we wanted to gamble on that, I would almost guarantee that what's happening, if your claim is paying, it wasn't us that paid it. I would almost guarantee the claim went out, it's coming back through, and I'm guessing if we're doing it as a retailer, our sister company, Candy Drugs, does as a retailer, I might almost guarantee that Rite Aid's also doing it as a retailer. There's a coupon getting applied at the switch that's reducing your copay down to your cost down to 74.
They didn't get the switch because I left it at Rite Aid.
Okay. So that switch levels we talk, very technically here to Synthroid alone. Can I guarantee here that we did not pay that claim at $74?
Yeah.
There is no way that we should have paid that claim at 74.
You didn't, because they kept it. So you didn't pay nothing, because I didn't either.
And I want to be clear. So we pay the claim long before you pick it up, right? It actually happens in real time. So whether you picked it up or not, if they don't reverse that claim out, we have already paid for it sitting at that drugstore. There is no $74 copay. So something happened. Either they're billing it cash or some other reduction in cost is happening through the switch that they may think they got a paid claim, but there is no reason at all, because you keep saying over and over, we have a contract of 0 and 25, and I thought I was losing my mind as Jeannie handed me the paperwork. You should not pay more than 25 for any of these drugs if they're approved. So if that's happening, we need to understand how and where, and we can get somebody on the phone this afternoon to call Rite Aid and find out what's happening, because that should not happen. I'm not denying that it did happen. I'm not saying it's not happening, but it should never happen if it's going through the prescription plan. There should be nothing more than 25.
So
and
I
we
ask
can
a
clear that up
question?
with a phone call. Yes, ma'am.
Nice. So there's two fee schedules, $0 and $25,
Yes.
right? For every single drug ever invented in the world.
Yep.
So
For the city of Syracuse.
Helen and Tom, both, for their drugs that are no longer $0, they will only ever be 25, correct?
That's the highest they're gonna pay for it.
Okay. And then
If
also,
it's covered on the formulary, so long as the drug is a covered drug on the formulary.
oh, so when
So
it's not.
if it's not covered, it's not covered. If it's a non-formulary drug, if it's excluded from the plan, it is not covered.
Okay.
So for covered, and that's where Monica was talking down
So
through,
who excludes it from the plan is the insurance?
the PBM. So semantics, right, small details, but our Pharmacy and Therapeutics Committee would determine what drugs are covered by the formulary and what drugs are not covered by the formulary.
Based on clinical efficacy and financial profile.
Yes, ma'am.
My question is utilization data. Do you go through the city's pharmaceutical claims from last year and say, we've got 100 employees on Synthroid, we're still gonna get rid of it? Or do you look at it and say, oh, we only have one employee out of X that takes Synthroid, so this is one that we can kick out, doesn't matter?
Do you want to answer kind of down through?
Back to Nader's quality of life point that every single person matters, so how do you deal with that?
Right.
Yeah, so we don't necessarily look and say this is going to be a huge disruption or a minimal disruption. We follow the same process of determining whether it makes clinical sense to keep it on the formulary or not keep it on the formulary, and then also look at the value associated with it. But there certainly are situations where if it was a huge impact, that's where kind of Monica came in and spoke about the disruption evaluation. So to understand if you're going to experience a lot of membership that is going to be disrupted, then that's just making sure that we're going to have more communication, better communication. In the diabetes class, for example, when we've had changes with preferred testing supplies, that typically there's a lot of members and patients that are using diabetic products. We make sure that we don't only use letters to notify members, but that we're also reaching out via email as well, so that there is good communication around what the alternatives are, if there is a free meter associated with it, and then other savings programs associated with the new preferred option.
you say good communication, I think they would disagree, but it's also one-way communication. You're not allowing for the pathway of the workers to come back and say, help. That doesn't work.
When we identified that the diabetic class was going to be more members disrupted, that's where it was really, there was two-way communication that we emailed our diabetic management members that were enrolled in the program, and there is allowing for two-way communication because they can easily email us.
So in that case, you did look at utilization data then?
Yes, for that type of disruption associated with that class. It doesn't necessarily mean we're still not going to make the decision, but we're going to make sure that we're providing enough education and support around the change so that members, although they're going to be disrupted, still know what the alternatives are and the process to go about making the switch.
So we have 5 minutes. We have anything else? That word disrupted, that bugs me because
Yes.
Whether it be the next healthcare coalition we have, when we go back and get the data, 2018, we had the disruption and the denials that were happening back in 2018 compared to what is happening now. Because there is some kind of disconnect, something that's happening and it's higher and it's more than it's, I mean, the numbers I looked at, and I wasn't at the last healthcare coalition, to me seem a little high.
So we could go back to 2019, and the reason I say that is we implemented a new, and I'll let Deb speak to what you want to talk through the kind of the platform.
Yep, so we have in addition to the portal that doctors can log in to answer questions related to a prior authorization, we have a sister software program to process the prior authorizations, and that provides us with any type of report that we want to pull related to how many prior authorization requests came in, how many were approved, how many were denied, how many were appealed, and then also the approval and denials associated with the appeals, which I did include, and sorry that I didn't have a lot of time to go through this package here, but I did include on slide 17 for the first quarter, because that's really where we felt there was some member noise or more noise than usual associated with the January 1st changes. We pulled the overall PA stats by number instead of percentage, so that there was better visibility as far as how many requests came in. So we received 235 requests. Of those, 122 were approved. Our average turnaround time was 2.1 days. Of those that were not approved, there was 71, but there was 42 of them that were dismissed. And when I say dismissed, it wasn't, they weren't denied. A letter was sent to the member or the prescriber either because a PA actually wasn't required. Maybe it was rejecting at the pharmacy for a drug intervention review that the pharmacist had to do and had nothing to do with a prior authorization. Maybe it was a lack of information. We reached out to the doctor, never got anything back, but we didn't deny it. We just said the case is going to be closed. If it needs to be reopened, let us know. Maybe there was already a PA completed and it was a duplicate request. So although there were 70 that were not approved, half of those were dismissed and they were not denied. So I wanted to break that out this time. I didn't in the last meeting. And then of those, I would say maybe those 40 or so that were not approved, there was 17 that were then sent to appeal. So the doctor followed the directions on the letter that we sent to him and to the member to request a second look at it. Of those 8, or about half of those, were approved. 6 were not approved and 3 were dismissed, again, either because maybe the appeal wasn't valid or there wasn't enough information submitted.
And I want to toss one more thing out there, because I know you guys obviously don't like this process, but the healthcare reform actually requires that we allow you to also go to external appeal. Now I want to be very, very clear about that. You have the right as a patient, your physician has the right as a prescriber to request an external appeal. What that means is it's no longer Deb and her team making that decision. If you don't like the way that we're tackling it, you can request an external appeal, and that claim will go out to an external review board that we, Nader, contract with. So we contract with a company that doesn't know us from anybody. We're just a number on a sheet. They would then work directly with their physicians, would work with your physician to make a determination on that. So if there's at any point that you're not pleased as to any of these drugs that you get down to that level being denied, you have the absolute right to do that as well. And I know we're down to about 2 minutes. Helen, I want to make sure before we leave here.
And the onus goes back on the patient.
Yep.
Exactly. Goes back on the members to go weed through all of that and never, and like I said, I would seriously would like to know the numbers that in, say, 2019. This new software, this new procedure you went to, is that what kicked it all up? Is that what kicked it all off? You know what I mean? Because at some point, and like I said, I've been a union leader a long time, and never, ever have we had this kind of complaints and this kind of disruption for our.
We can certainly go back and we can look at that for you. That won't be an issue.
I think all I wanted to say is, while I understand that you guys are explaining the process that as it presently is, it seems that there needs to be a change moving forward. Because what we have right now is not working. And I don't think it can be, oh, well, it's just, this is how we do it, and you just don't understand. There has to be some kind of give and take, whether it's more case management on PROAC's end, I don't know, but there has to be some kind of, there has to be a change.
Well, and I want to make sure, and I don't disagree. Before we leave here, I want to make sure if there are people, and I know you can say you can fix mine, you can override mine, but I can't change it for everybody else's, like in, I think, your opening comments. But I want to make sure we can fix and control what we can control. So if we have known members such as yourself that have issues, I want to make sure that our team leaves here with that information today so that we can go address it, so that we can go fix it. I don't want you to go another day if you've gone 3 to 4 months without your medication. That's certainly not the intent. Yes, Nathan.
Thank you. One follow-up. So again, I'm an old man, so if I can't comprehend, I apologize. So I'm confused because the city draws up the contract. They set out an RFP, and the city draws up a contract. And the contract language, so we pay you as our third-party representative. So the city could say to you all in their contract to address the issues that have been raised today and not leave the judgment and decision up to you, correct?
We administer the benefit as advised by the plan sponsor, which would be the city of Syracuse.
So short answer to that is yes, what I just asked? I'm not trying to be cute.
I'm not trying to be obtuse here and do like obtuse,
Yeah, right.
quoting the question. I don't know what restraints or constraints the city would have to do that. Ultimately, we administer the benefit on behalf of the city of Syracuse.
I understand that part, but the language could be such that the city of Syracuse can say, for the circumstances that have been addressed today, this is how they would like to have it handled. Because I think, if I understand it correctly, what has happened is that in the labor discussions, the members and the labor leaders have been told one thing. And then what they're hearing is an interpretation of the contract that the city made on their behalf, leaving it up to you, not you personally, to interpret what it is that's going to be done in response to the needs of the individuals. Correct?
Part of the problem, though, is that the formula
No, wait,
changes
excuse me,
twice a
excuse me,
year.
Counselor.
Sorry.
I just want him to answer.
So, correct, we administer, it's semantics, but the contract itself with us does not dictate how we administer the plan. The contract dictates other terms. As part of that, it would outline for us that there are benefit forms that we're provided by the city or by a representative of the city that outlines how the plan should be administered. So, again, I want to be very clear, because an auditor, I'm always very careful with these things. So, what I say matters, right? Words matter. And in those situations, the contract itself with PROACT, between the city and PROACT, does not dictate what we cover. As part of the agreement, there's a plan sponsor responsibility that outlines that they, the city of Syracuse, are obligated to provide to PROACT the details of how they want that benefit administered. And then we are obligated to, therefore, administer the benefit in accordance with that.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
That makes sense, but the step that you left out, the city of Syracuse negotiated in good faith with the labor contracts and told the members and the membership X, Y, and Z. What I'm hearing today is there's something missing from what has been told to the labor people in settling an agreement for them, for their benefits package, and what then is left up to be interpreted by you all. That's,
Yeah, I think that's the piece that I'm confused on, because
So,
there is a zero copay, there's a 25 copay, a $75 copay is not, or $74 copay.
it's not about the copay.
Okay.
I think we all agree that there's
Yep.
something that may have happened and it shouldn't have, and you'll look into that. That's not the issue. It's about the language that is given to the labor people to go to their membership and say, this is what you're gonna have for a pay raise, 3%. This is what you're gonna have for health insurance coverage. This is what it's gonna cost you for single and family, et cetera, et cetera. And this is what's gonna be in it. And then the city takes that in good faith and takes that and writes up the contract or the RFP that goes out to you all. Something seems to be missing in that translation, as I'm hearing it.
Can I just ask a question to that
Yes,
question?
I'm sorry, Counselor.
Formulary changes twice a year, and I think that's the disconnect, right? That's why they're unhappy, because the formulary changed, and that's not, am I wrong?
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think
No, but the formulary changes, and that's pretty standard, I think, in the industry, correct? So it would seem to me that if that's conveyed to the membership, but there isn't going to be something that says, okay, the formulary changes, but we need to do better on our part that says of our membership are on certain drugs, and if they appear on this new formulary change, how does that get put into the contract to protect the membership so that you don't have the situations that Tom or Darcy experienced? That should not happen. Because in my view, for the city, I'm advocating on their behalf on this, not formally, but from what I've heard today, they need to know that that's going to change, instead of having, in Darcy's case, getting out of the hospital and having that anxiety.
And that's a very unique situation, and a situation whereas you as a patient were not on that drug before, right? Versus Michaela, I'd argue you were on the drug, were notified 60 to 90 days before.
I was on an IV.
Absolutely. So in that situation, that is there's no right answer for that, Nader.
Exactly.
But I would say that with the metformin or the Synthroid, notifications do go out to notify the patient if and when there's a change to that formulary twice before the actual change occurs.
I think to what Nader's saying is, our contracts all say, I believe, please, I don't know what's really in there, but I know all the no, I really don't, to be honest with you, but I know all the AFSCME units, right? It says our health care will be equal to or better than. When you start excluding drugs and you start telling people they can't have their prescriptions, how is that equal to or better than? Right? And on the second note is, why can't we have some kind of thing that says if you're going to change the formulary every 6 months and say we're going to disclude this, why isn't there some kind of say to the city of Syracuse, this is going to be the disruption and this is how many people that it's going to disrupt, and let the city of Syracuse say we're going to make that change.
So,
we don't want to make that change.
So if we want to talk contract language, as part of our contract language with the city of Syracuse, we are authorized as the administrator of the benefit plan to make the changes to the formulary, and that they must accept the provisions of that formulary as we adopt them. They must adopt them as we make the changes. So it's Article 7.4 of the rebate agreement that we have with the city of Syracuse.
So in that case, excuse me, Tom, so in that case, the city needs to be, when they're doing the RFP and they're negotiating with a third party, they need to be clear about what they want. And that's my point, is that the city has entered into good faith contract with the membership. So the city has an obligation, as I'm hearing it today, not knowing all the facts, but the city has the obligation to make sure that doesn't happen. I understand your contractual language that you've given back to the city, but what I'm saying that the city needs to, in good faith, that they've entered into contract with their membership and the unions, need to make sure that protection is there for them. And that's a cost to the city. I understand that financially, but that needs to be done, not leaving it up to you all to decide, not you, again, the collective you.
Nader, completely, and I think to your point, back to the contracts, I'm not a labor attorney, right? I have never read any of your labor contracts or what they say with the city of Syracuse. Monica had said it in the opening statements. Ultimately, everything can be approved all the time if that's the decision. Guys, I'm here, I started saying I'm a pharmacist first, but now I'm going to stand as a businessman saying that there are some severe financial implications of making those choices, right? I'm not saying it's a right or wrong choice. That's not my choice to make. Ultimately, that's a decision that would have to be made, and we would have to be advised to administer the benefit that way.
But on the converse of that, and I understand that completely, but also if one of the members in any of the unions has some reaction and gets more sick and then is out on workers' comp, there's also financial consequences of that. There's services that don't get done.
Yep. And Nader, and I don't want to be argumentative. I know we're way past our time.
No, we're not trying to argue. We're just trying to get clarity.
But we're also making a lot of hypotheticals, right? This could happen, this could happen, because there's a lot of things that could happen.
There's no question about that, but the point is that these are the kinds of things that should happen in the discussions when we enter into a new contract on behalf of the city, at least from what I know today. It would be my opinion that we would look at all of those issues and what might come. I realize they're all hypotheticals, but the reality is we should look at that and do the financial planning necessary in the city to accommodate that.
Thank you, President.
Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you.
And to Nader's point, I think that the common council and whoever the RFP committee happens the next time, I think it seriously needs to be looked at, that before any formulation changes are, at least it's gotta be run by the city. And who's affected, how many people's affected? I mean, Helen might be the only one that takes that thyroid medicine, right?
So does that mean that we should or shouldn't change it?
Right. Well, just take it in consideration.
But the cost might.
City as opposed to.
Yep.
Right, but, it should be put in the hands of the city to say, 100 people take this name brand Lantus, right? You call it name brand, right? And the cost to the city is gonna be X, Y, and Z, right? That should be up to the city or the committee or whatever happens to make that decision.
So the only challenge with that, and I hear you, and that makes all the sense in the world, it's your plan, you should be able to administer it and do those things. We ProAct administer benefits for 700,000 members across the country, right? We negotiate with Big Pharma, saying that if we're going to allow your members to use these drugs, this is a deal you have to give us so that we can do that. The city of Syracuse goes out with 6,000 total members on the plan and tries to negotiate. If we start doing one-offs, it's going to drastically change the financial obligations I have to the city of Syracuse in running this company of what we can give back in terms of discounts and rebates if we try to negotiate a one-off for 5,000 lives, 6,000 lives outside of the 700,000. And I hope that makes sense. But if we try to negotiate a different formulary for this small piece of the business over here, it will absolutely change the economics of what we do with that.
Are you saying that the contract that you have with the city is sort of blanket? That's a standard contract that you have with any organization you work with, and it's not something that can be adjusted?
No. So I don't know, 250 contracts I reviewed last year, everyone's different. The rebate portion and our ability to administer the formulary as a PBM, when I started in ProAct, we had 27 different formularies that we managed. We now have 2. And that's the way the industry's gone. And it's done it for a lot of different reasons, but as time has gone by, those have become more and more restrictive, and there are less variability in terms of choosing what that looks like. We as PBMs, all PBMs, and again, it doesn't matter if it's ProAct, if it's ESI, if it's CVS Caremark or OptumRx, they each are out there negotiating to try to get the best deal for their plan sponsors like the city of Syracuse. But they're all different. Every contract's different. What we do with rebates in the formulary is very consistent across the board.
And I think, to interrupt to your point, Tom, us acting as a PBM doesn't benefit us in a lot of ways. That if you open the floodgates, we can't control cost, and we have a fiduciary responsibility to the taxpayers of the city of Syracuse. But what they're doing is acting as the net and letting a few fish through that need to go through versus us saying all the fish can go through. So to your point that if there is a drug, or to the point that if there is a drug that is $6,000 a month and the majority of people are able to take the drug that's $20 a month, they set that net up so that the few people that do need the $6,000 drug can come through, but it stops all those people that don't need the $6,000 drug from getting a $6,000 drug when a $20 drug works.
I think the bigger issue, because I understand that there are certainly people that can take generics, certainly it's about saving money. I get the business end of things. I think it comes back to managing it in a way that benefits the patients as opposed to punishing the patients. People should not be going without medication. If it's something on the back end that needs to be fixed or something, but there should never be a time that we say, well, your doctor prescribed this, but we're not going to give it. We're only going to give it to you for this amount of time, and then we need to have some discussions with the doctor. We need to have a discussion or have this done or whatever. and get that involvement, but I think the ultimate thing is there should never be a time that an employee does not have medicine that their doctor is determining that they need.
And
And that's our biggest issue, is that people are winding up in detrimental health situations because they're being denied. And I understand, you know, why, but I think there needs to be some kind of a workaround to assist us in getting where we need to be, as opposed to just sort of closing off the gate and saying, well, once we get all of this, then we can give you the medicine.
And I want to take ownership for that issue, because it is our obligation as the employer to communicate that to our members. So being new, we are not doing a good enough job communicating and educating our team on the workarounds that ProAct is allowing us. So it's our responsibility as the Human Resources Department to educate people and get them to understand the processes that are in place, because they're saying that we have the ability to allow that script and then we can do the paperwork in between. And we're over here saying no. So that's our job as HR to inform everybody and to get you the proper information so that you can disseminate that to your constituents to say, hey, it may seem like X, but in reality, we can do these steps to work in tandem with ProAct rather than.
That may be ultimately the thing, whether it's a city thing or whether it's a ProAct thing or whether it's a combination of both. Ultimately, the people that are suffering are the ones that need the medication.
Correct.
So it's a matter of finding out where we're hitting that wall and
And Michaela, I want to make sure before we leave here today, now we're probably 25 minutes overdue, but I want to make sure we get over that wall, right? The patients that need medication today, I want to make sure that we take care of that. And if I have to go to Rite Aid this afternoon and
I already spent $187 with Synthroid.
okay, so let's get that details.
But why can't we just grandfather people that are on the medications? Why can't they just be grandfathered in? And anybody that gets these new medications and get put up there, why are we taking, I can't wrap my head around taking people off of medication that they've been on for years and it's working for them. On financial costs. Because like I said, and why can't we as the city say, well, that's why I said, they send you and it's gonna affect 20 people, or it's gonna affect 100 people. And this,
Absolutely.
well, why can't we grandfather them people in, and then anybody that goes for the new truck, try the generic?
So that's something I can work with ProAct on to see if that is a possibility to grandfather folks in. I'm not opposed to that, and I'll gladly discuss that with them. And because I do want to help, I do want it to be better. And to Dave's point, I mean, a doctor is going to sell you a Ferrari every time. Or not every, I shouldn't say every time. There is going to be a lot of times where a name brand is a Ferrari, and that's going to be issued more often than not.
Great.
So to piggyback on what Rick just said, we can definitely work together to try to have a better process in place for all of your employees, because we're in the business to help you get your drugs, not allow you to get.
Yeah, I should be very clear too. I said that we pay the pharmacy one rate and then we pass it through the city at the same rate. We don't mark that up. I had an admin fee. If we're not filling claims, guys, I'm not getting paid. So at the end of the day, it's not our job to stop prescriptions from getting filled. It's our job. I mean, we want them getting filled. Ultimately, I do have 5 little ones at home I've got to send to college at some point. So I
I don't think that's for second, right? I just think that there has to be a better process. So all these years that I've been involved in this, right, we've always been said, oh, but your health insurance, your health insurance, and we say, okay, yeah, we'll take this, we'll take that, right? So as from a union standpoint, we're here, but our healthcare was always, our benefits were always here, right? Yeah. And that's what we chose as bargaining units to say we would rather have better benefits than better pay. Right.
And
right?
So Tom,
now it seems like the switch is flipped. So the people that are on it, there has to be you have to be in touch with Margaret or whoever be in the city and say, look, this is going to affect X amount of people, and this is going to be the cost per year.
So Tom, I'm going to say going back to probably 2014, 2015, you and I have had these conversations, right? And you're consistent with what you're saying today, consistent with what you said 7 years ago, right? It's the same message. Where I think it's getting very personal now is the fact that it's one of your medications. Because you and I have had these conversations before, right? Well, okay. And
I'm not at my, and anybody to tell you, that's a union leader. Like I said, I had a guy call me 3 days ago, I gave him one of my insulin pens because Proact wouldn't fill his insulin.
And I'm also very concerned that somebody's taking Lantus 3 times a day. Was very alarming for me.
I was wondering why I think it is that he takes insulin 3 times a day, Lantus once at night.
Okay. So I was like, I'm like, we need to. He's got hypoglycemia. Is probably in the hospital at this point. Okay. So
Still, his nightly shot, he didn't have.
I guess my point, and I didn't mean to be insulting with that. I guess my point is that these are the same conversations that we've had. Right? When these things come up, this is not the first go around. So as we're talking through, this is a new thing. These are not new conversations that we've had as an industry, as an organization, or with the city of Syracuse. I think now we're seeing more happening right now as part of this. I think that we've got a couple very common drugs that changed on the formulary for January 1st. I think that we're seeing some changes that are impacting maybe a higher percentage of people that's causing more noise. But these changes are things, I mean, we've had these conversations with formulary changes, exclusions before. I think there's just a lot more noise happening now. And maybe we're not doing a very good job in how we communicate that out. And we need to do a better job there.
Well, and it, like I said, it may be a matter of figuring out a better case management on the front end as opposed to how to fix it after there's a problem.
So I hope we haven't disagreed.
What I'm hearing here is that we're gonna work together to try to figure out how to kind of sort of.
Absolutely. Some of the onus is on the city and the HR department for not communicating effectively how this system works. So it's up to me now as the new director to work with Proact to ensure that we can get everybody everything they need while still being fiscally responsible.
And please understand this, we're not ignorant people.
No, I'm not saying you.
No, I'm not saying you are. And we understand how the generic and the real drug work, okay?
Absolutely.
And again, if I could take the generic, I'd more than gladly take it. Because that $25, if I save it for 2 months, I could buy some shoes.
Right, but but if Proact's on this end of the table saying that there is a way to get to that, and there's a way to fill it in the meantime until we get that paperwork situated with your doctor, that's our fault for not communicating that. And they can speak to it. I reached out 7 minutes after they left that office the first Friday, and I said, we're missing an educational piece here. So the first thing I did when I got back to the office was start to pull educational information so that I can teach people how to use the Proact system. The system's in place for a reason, so how can we more easily navigate that is what this really boils down to.
So can you do me a favor, though?
Absolutely.
Just for my own sake, can you send me the breakdown, because I'm sure you have it, on all of the city employees that take drugs and all of the city employees that don't take drugs?
I'm sure we
had that probably. Do you have the annual report package? So you want just a percentage of how many patients take drug versus don't?
Well, and just kind of circle back, Bill. Like I said, we for a long time have been in the and I have never seen it this bad. I've never seen the percentage this high. I've never seen this much disruption and this much complaints as far as prescription drug goes. So there has to be something has to change because people aren't happy. People it's just too cumbersome. Like she said, they just you beat them with a whip for so long, they just say, forget it, I'll take whatever. And it's to Nader's point, we're human beings, everybody, not just me.
Sure.
It's my membership, right?
Helen said that, and I 100% agree.
At the end of the day, I'll do what I gotta do, and if I gotta pay for it like her, I'll pay for it out of my pocket if I need it that bad, right? But it's the membership as a whole. It's the city of Syracuse. It's not just the union. It's the people that aren't union.
And it's some folks that can't even pay out of their pocket.
So this should be an issue that everybody's concerned with, whether you're
Had it
union
not
or not.
affected this many people, though, we wouldn't know that there was.
Absolutely.
Right.
So to answer Ms. Hudson's questions, for 2021, you had a total of, on average, 5,856 members on the plan. Utilizing members members, meaning members who actually filled a script, was 4,566 members. So I'm not a
So
mathematician
two-thirds.
whiz, but that's probably roughly, what, 75%?
80%.
So how many of them are maintenance drugs, and how many of them are the Z-Pack for the flu, and how many of them?
Well, we don't have that in that report.
Right.
No, you're not wrong.
Right.
You're not wrong.
Right.
We can get that for you. You're not wrong. Yeah, I'm saying you're absolutely correct.
Right.
Because to that point, it could have, Darcy, right? It could have been that one antibiotic that you had prescribed
Right.
in August and nothing else ever, right?
Well-
Versus somebody else.
Retail maintenance, I do have that number, 29,287
Prescriptions.
prescriptions.
That's
Out of-
prescriptions,
out-
but
out
how
how
many
many total?
people?
Out of retail only, 49,234. So 29,000.
So that's just under 60%.
Yeah.
So just under 60% of the prescriptions.
Okay, okay, I'm gonna let you have the last word, and then we're gonna close this meeting down unless you have a last word.
No, they tell me I'm not supposed to have the
The
last
only
word.
last word I just want to say is if whoever members, if you can get your names to Rick can give them to me, and then we can do the investigative work, especially like for all your situations that you talked about, so that we can get to the bottom of what happened.
And
And that will in turn help us with our process.
Absolutely. I just want to end by saying it is, again, our responsibility. So please reach out, have your constituents reach out to us directly. They're the system. We teach people how to use the system. So let us help everybody teach everybody how to use the system. So reach out to us. I'm working with them to get more educational things to make this less of a burden. But realistically, that process isn't going to change if we went to any of the other big players. And quite frankly, I may be wrong, but I don't think any of the big four would show up to this meeting. They just tell you tough and deal with it. So PROACT, I do appreciate what they're doing, and they put in the effort to be here and to be a part of it. So let me take some ownership.
And I will say, if it's possible, union leadership needs to be educated, because whether it's
Absolutely.
an HR issue or not,
They go to you.
Correct.
people are not nice, but we're the ones that have to answer the question.
We need to work together to educate everybody else. So I think, again, I'm not here to fight anybody. I'm just trying to bridge the gap between. Absolutely.
Give her, like, my case in point. I don't want to give you my case in point. I'm talking about the whole
Absolutely.
city of Syracuse, everybody, from the mayor down that is on this plan. We need to do a better job for them.
And you got the last word. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, PROACT. Thank you, Counselor. Thank you, all of my labor unions, and thank you, HR.